This program has content that may concern some viewers, including references to suicide and eating disorders. There's a bitter war underway over the control of young people's bodies.
The body that I'm in, I don't want to be in this anymore.
She was born with a boy's body and she has a girl's heart and mind.
Transgender kids are at the centre of a polarising debate over medical intervention to help deal with their distress. The recognised treatment in Australia includes drugs to pause puberty.
It's not one session and you get hormones. That's a total misconception about what we do.
Opponents warn medication is dangerous. Do you think there's ever a case for an adolescent to transition medically?
My personal opinion is that it would be good to disallow the prescription of puberty blockers to children with gender dysphoria.
Now the conflict is being played out in hospitals, and at the centre is Westmead Children's in Sydney.
We called Westmead Children's Hospital. As empathetic as they were to our situation, they couldn't help us.
The waiting lists for gender care are growing.
I'd have families emailing, calling and saying, my child's so distressed, we need to do something.
And it's the kids at risk.
I was bargaining with God. I wanted him to come back. I was praying.
All this against a wave of anti-trans sentiment sweeping the globe.
The left-wing gender insanity being pushed on our children is an act of child abuse.
We will not let you lie to our children.
Look at the Nazis. Look at the Nazis.
I want to understand why medical interventions for young transgender people have become such a battleground. Is it right to provide puberty blockers and hormones? Is enough caution being exercised? And is this model the lifesaver its supporters say it is?
I'm Brock Wilcox. I'm a 14-year-old trans girl and I live in the western part of Sydney. I started realising that I was different mainly in primary school. I always imagined myself having long hair and putting on makeup and wearing dresses, and I would always be like, oh, I wish I was a girl. But I would be disappointed to find out, oh, you're a boy, you have to stay like this.
Let's go. Let's go.
I suppose the first thing that we noticed in preschool, I'd come and pick her up and she'd be a princess and dressed up and pushing a pram and wearing the fake high heels and not really your kind of typical roughhouse boy.
As puberty kicked in, the flamboyant, confident kid became withdrawn and depressed.
I tried going to therapy to try and explain this and try to be like, why do I feel like this? It's not about going to therapy to fix it.
How do you know you weren't influenced?
I wasn't influenced by a trans person. I did not know any trans person growing up at all. Not one trans person, not even anyone on any sort of social media.
Brock kept it to herself. She knew that her mum was sceptical about transgender issues.
I was hearing all these different things in the media, and when the debate came up about, a point, with the pronouns, and I said, why should we be catering to these people? If they're identifying, if I can see biologically they're a male, I'm going to say that they're a male.
In Year 8, Brock found the courage to tell her mum through a text message.
She opened my bedroom door and I just saw that she was in tears. As she started just apologising to me And the reason she was apologising to me was because in the past she wasn't the most accepting person of being trans. And she just was crying to me and apologising for everything that she had said. Just everything and anything.
It was the first time that I'd really seen Brock show what she's been going through. And it was just so hard to see because it was just such raw emotion, and she just hates her body and can't stand to look at herself.
I was going to try and bring some home for you to try. You wouldn't even try it.
Renee was determined to support Brock, but she struggled to find help.
Do you want to do different flavours?
We called Westmead Children's Hospital. They couldn't help us. So even though Brock is a child, they do draw a line in the sand for certain developmental milestones. In Brock's case, it was because Brock's voice had already broken.
What do you want to...
Renee turned to another New South Wales health-run clinic, Maple Leaf House in Newcastle.
When I spoke to them on the phone and they said that they could help me despite the milestone that Brock had already achieved, I broke down and cried. It was such a relief.
This feels wrong. It's like going under my nails.
A psychiatrist diagnosed Brock with gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria refers to the psychological distress experienced by those whose gender identity doesn't match their biological sex. Brock started treatment known as gender-affirming care, which is an established medical practice across Australia. It starts with a multidisciplinary assessment and can progress to medical intervention. Brock was prescribed puberty blockers to stop her developing as a young man.
Obviously, you wouldn't want to rush into treatment when you're just finding out that your child is transgender. For us, it made sense. The fact that Brock had been going to a psychologist for quite a while was reassuring to know that, you know, it's not a phase, so to speak. But when you're at that age of 13, development's fast.
Do we spray them with olive oil or something?
Doesn't say that in the TikTok.
We're following a TikTok video.
Yeah. That's where I got the recipe from.
Oh my gosh.
The Maple Leaf clinicians told Brock's family the blocking effects are reversible, but they warned about the potential side effects, which can include reduced bone density.
The fact that Brock is now 14 and won't have to be on blockers for a lengthy period of time, I suppose that relieves a lot of concern that we had. But it's definitely something that we've had to weigh up, and we're okay with that. We're okay with that risk.
These are just all my rings and my earrings. And then
Brock will soon have her third injection of puberty blockers.
How long have you been collecting?
She says she's relieved she's stopped developing into a body that she doesn't identify with.
This jacket, love this jacket.
She no longer hides the clothes she wants to wear.
And it just makes me feel rich and fashionable.
To act like you are an angry customer in a shop. Go.
Why? It's coffee.
I'm really into like theatre and drama.
Do any of these wake you up? My coffee is cold.
You get to pretend to be someone else, which is kind of almost like what I've been doing all my life.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brock.
By November, I should hopefully be starting hormones, which is really something that I feel I need. Not want, I feel I need.
You have 5 minutes to prepare your play.
Cross-sex hormones are often the next stage of gender-affirming care. Daily pills or patches of estrogen would mean that Brock would slowly start looking more feminine and develop breasts and hips. The physical changes from cross-sex hormones are irreversible.
The choice was allow Brock to live a life in true authenticity, potentially very happy life, and hopefully a long life. When you weigh the prospect up and what's the alternative, potentially not having a child, Brock was literally planning her death. What choice do we have?
I didn't choose to be born in this body and then want to be born in another. Like, that's not a choice that I just made. Like, I didn't wake up one day and be like, yeah, I'm trans. No. It was years of dysphoria, self-hate, that it took me to find out you're not in the right body.
Referrals to Australia's 7 publicly funded gender services are ballooning. Since it first opened 10 years ago, Melbourne's Royal Children's Hospital has had more than 3,300 referrals. 62% of those were females assigned at birth. Last year, they had 1,095 patients, 7 times as many as the Westmead Children's Hospital's gender service in Sydney. Wait lists are long. Latest figures show the gender service at Queensland Children's Hospital has more than 600 patients waiting for a first appointment. A feud over how to treat kids with gender issues is playing out at Westmead Children's Hospital in Sydney's West. It's a feud the hospital hierarchy has tried to keep under wraps. But a few former Westmead staff have been brave enough to help us tell this story. They've told us there are deep divisions over how to help kids with gender distress.
When I started puberty, I got really depressed. I was super anxious about myself, how I was looked at by people. It was a really hard time for me.
Westmead Hospital saw Ashley urgently and prioritised consultation with him because he was self-harming. His mental health had deteriorated rapidly.
Ashley was prescribed puberty blockers in 2015. His mother agreed that he could be part of emerging research on gender distress conducted by clinicians at the hospital. It was this research that laid the foundation for a series of peer-reviewed papers published between 2021 and 2023. Recent frontline staff at the gender service were not involved.
It was really important to me that we were able to share this experience with researchers to be able to help with the way forward. Let's show that, you know, trans kids are a natural, normal part of every society on earth.
Ashley's mum, Lannan, never anticipated how events would unfold. The Westmead research papers would be weaponised by outside opponents to gender-affirming care. In 2021, Westmead researchers published a peer-reviewed report examining the clinical characteristics of 79 young people seeking help at the gender service. They pointed to complex family trauma amongst many of those reviewed. High rates of adverse childhood experiences, including family conflict, parental mental illness, and loss of important figures via separation. A history of maltreatment was also common. They stopped short of finding a causal link. They argued going straight to the gender-affirming model is dangerous and said a trauma-informed model of mental health care should be included in all gender care clinics. They said clinicians, including ourselves, are coming under increasing pressure to compromise their own ethical standards by engaging in a tick-the-box treatment process. Genetic pathologist Dr. Anya Ravine was watching on from another part of the hospital. As a transgender woman herself, she was curious about the research showing family trauma amongst young transgender people.
The implicit messaging that I read in this, which actually wasn't said directly, but it was implicitly there and quite powerful, is that these children, transness and presentation with associated distress, is really something that's emerged out of a background of early childhood traumas, poor parenting practices, associated impaired parent-child attachment patterns. These papers have all the badges that you'd expect, they're credentialed. And people look to those credentials.
So how are you feeling about?
Ashley's mum, Lannan, read it as parent blaming.
The report from Westmead seemed to allude to kids are trans because of their depression. Kids are trans because of dysfunction in the home. That was horrific to read for me because we had dysfunction in the home and Ashley had depression because we weren't getting help with him being trans.
This train will stop at Lidcombe.
In late 2022, Anna started as a clinical psychologist at the Westmead Children's Gender Service. It was early in her clinical career and she was committed to helping young people who were in distress.
I was very passionate about helping these trans youth that have, one of the highest rates of suicidality and difficulties and, social stigma still and difficulties at school. And I wanted to be able to provide ongoing support where I could really hear them, validate them and help them through their journey.
This station is Westmead.
But she was finding it hard to do her job.
I didn't feel supported. I felt that the environment was very difficult. I think that, one of the main issues was that the long wait list, the lack of staff. Our model of care was being developed and to sort of become a better, improved model of care, but it was never finalised. It was never, no action was ever taken with that. We were told that we had received funding for more staff, which would have been fantastic. But while I was there was nothing, no change. Same huge wait list.
It was a clear black night, a clear white moon.
Noah O'Brien was on that waiting list. Noah was 14 when he first told his mother he identified as a boy.
We kind of thought that maybe it was a friend influence or someone online or something like that. But the longer that time went on, we just saw, no, it was definitely just him, who he was.
Noah asked to go to the GP to find out about puberty blockers.
We didn't realise at that point that he was already going through the beginnings of the eating disorder. So he was taking that matter into his own hands to stop his own periods and stop his breast growth through not eating.
We can't know for sure what exactly caused Noah's eating disorder, but research has shown that eating disorders are often associated with gender dysphoria. Noah's food refusal got worse and he ended up at Westmead Children's Hospital. He was discharged the next day.
They thought it was not an eating disorder, that perhaps it was gender related, and that they had put in his discharge papers that our GP needed to make a referral for the gender centre.
The GP sent the referral last October. Noah's family didn't know he would be pushed way down the waiting list at the Westmead Children's Gender Service because it deprioritises children who are well advanced into puberty. An insider has told Four Corners it could have been a year before Noah was seen.
Her child had a problem. It needed to be fixed, So Lauren rang places, went to the doctors, tried everywhere to get help, but it was just like doors were closing in her face, There was just nobody was responding to her call for help.
As Noah struggled with gender issues, his eating disorder also got worse. He was readmitted to Westmead Children's Hospital and treated for anorexia. There was still no gender-focused care for Noah apart from this.
So this is the bag that was given to Noah when he was in hospital, and it had some printouts from the internet, medical guidelines for gender diverse and treatments. There's stuff about gender diverse musicians, some stickers, a place in Blacktown that you can go to, legal services, and just a few little things in here, but nothing that linked to the hospital, nothing that gave us any sort of direction of where to go next. And again, it's paper. It's not a person saying, this is what we're going to do to help. We're here with you.
Four Corners has learnt that it was a social worker from the gender service who visited Noah. The social worker later wrote an email saying this: I met with Noah and provided him with community support information. He also mentioned that his cycles were causing distress, so I wondered if menstrual management could be discussed with him. But that discussion didn't go ahead. A senior staff member from outside the gender service told the social worker that she needed to cease involvement with Noah due to the eating disorder being the primary focus. Noah was effectively denied specialist gender support.
It was very, very confusing. It was almost like they walked in and said, okay, this is a gender issue. Here, take this bag and go research and go from there.
After nearly 4 weeks in the eating disorder unit, Noah was sent home. His discharge summary included gender dysphoria. He was still on the waiting list.
I think Noah should have at least seen somebody that could help him with his gender issues and, sort of set a course of action that could be followed up and monitored. But there was just nothing.
This year's summer holidays were drawing to a close and Noah was anxious about returning to school. He would be wearing a boy's uniform for the first time.
I think he was just worried about how people would react to him presenting at school as Noah. I think he felt like they would see him as the person that had been in their class before as Lily, and that somebody might say something, or that they might think he's a fraud.
And then the unthinkable happened.
About 12:15, the phone rang, and I thought, oh, it's Lauren, and so I picked it up and went, hello, sort of just, what are you still doing awake? And that's when she said, it's Noah.
My husband gave him CPR. And the ambulance and the police arrived about 4 minutes after we called them. And they took him to Westmead Hospital, where he stayed alive until 6 in the morning. That was from about 11 o'clock. So we got 7 hours to actually say goodbye.
I think Noah didn't want to be a girl, but I feel like he didn't get any help or support in making that transition to become a male. I mean, we did all we could. Lauren did more than anyone ever could. But we just didn't get any help from anywhere that could help us.
If there had been doctors from the gender service being able to see Noah, do you think that would have made a difference? I mean, we can't know.
Definitely. I think if they had have been speaking to him and found out what he needed, I think it definitely would have changed things.
It wasn't long before news of Noah's death reached the frontline clinicians at the gender service.
I think the core team was incredibly distressed and felt completely helpless. I can't speak for them, but I know I felt helpless and I felt just extreme angst and sadness for this family that we're on this wait list. And it just kind of showed that, yes, it happens, the suicidal ideation is high, and sometimes it does eventuate into suicide.
In the wake of Noah's death, a paediatrician at the gender service asked Westmead Children's Hospital to make changes to help high-risk patients. But she saw no change.
I think if that had happened and there'd been a great change in the service for the better, and we were able to help more people in a more timely manner, that would have been great. Some silver lining. But nothing changed, so we were just left feeling sad and helpless and not able to make any positive changes going forward, really.
Westmead Children's Hospital issued a statement offering our sincere condolences to Noah's family. Due to patient privacy and confidentiality, Sydney Children's Hospitals Network is unable to provide further information about his specific care. For months, they've declined to answer specific questions about the gender service. Four Corners has obtained Freedom of Information documents which show Westmead Children's Gender Service is taking on very few new patients. Up to June this year, it's taken on just 3 compared to 88 last year. The most recent data shows the Westmead service had 145 active patients last year. Westmead Children's Hospital says it continues to provide holistic, culturally safe and affirming care to current patients. Westmead's latest research paper was published in February this year, and this one would have the greatest impact. The paper highlighted increasing rates of what's known as rapid onset gender dysphoria, particularly amongst a small subset of adolescent girls. It's a contested concept. The paper speculates it's caused by some evolving social process.
If a young person has been exposed to the ubiquitous media onslaught on both social media and the internet, and also, in peer groups at school, in rainbow clubs and so on, there are the vulnerable young people who will be drawn into that sphere of thinking that they're transgender.
Psychologist Diana Kenny is an ambassador for Binary, a lobby group which campaigns against so-called gender ideology. She treats adolescents with gender distress in her clinical practice.
The approach is essentially a psychotherapeutic approach that helps the young person and his or her family understand all of the complex dynamics that have resulted in the young person experiencing gender dysphoria. It is not conversion therapy. It provides a safe exploratory space for children to look at themselves and to gain a greater understanding.
One of the most controversial findings in the latest Westmead research relates to the concept of desistance. And the rate of desistance is often used as an argument against gender-affirming care. The Westmead researchers defined desistance as the disappearance of gender-related distress that brought the young person to the clinic. They reported that gender distress eventually disappeared for 22% of those they studied.
For the general public, child's desisted. That they're no longer trans, would be what you would think, right? But when you read the papers, there's actually a variety of definitions. When you look carefully at where that 22% comes from, it includes children who were originally assessed and considered not to meet the diagnostic criteria. So they were never eligible for referral on for consideration of pubertal blockade. And that was the majority of them, and there were others as well.
This particular way this data's been presented is an outlier. Actually, if you go to the data that's in the paper, it's entirely consistent with the opposite conclusion, that it's very rare for actual young people to completely decide to go back to the gender assigned at birth.
The report also stated that there was a 9.1% desistance rate amongst those who were diagnosed with gender dysphoria. The report concluded the evidence base for the gender-affirming medical pathway is sparse, and for the young people who may regret their choice, the risks for potential harm are significant. When that last Westmead research was published, what was your reaction?
The researchers had taken the effort to really convey the issues at hand. It became clear to me that they really wanted to try and assist Australia to come to terms with this issue by explaining everything. And that made me happy, because I really wish that we would be able to talk about this because it's a child protection issue.
What happened inside the culture of the clinic after that paper was published?
I think there was a lot of distress. It felt chaotic in that, you know, instead of families calling about appointments, they were calling to, you know, raise their concerns and their distress. It was very difficult for the staff as well.
2 months after the final research was published, Anna decided to resign.
I left feeling defeated. I think there was so much I wanted to do, and it's such a high need area. These kids and these adolescents are struggling.
The Westmead research landed amid an increasingly polarised global debate over gender-affirming care. At least 20 US states are moving to ban or restrict gender-affirming care for young people.
This will permanent outlaw the mutilation of minors. It will outlaw the surgical procedures and experimental puberty blockers for minors.
The left-wing gender insanity being pushed on our children is an act of child abuse.
In the UK, the long-running gender service at London's Tavistock Clinic has been accused of rushing patients into taking gender-affirming drugs.
A number of clinicians who were working there became very concerned about the treatment that young people were receiving, believing that they weren't being assessed properly before being placed on a medicalised pathway.
On the back of this, the UK National Health Service has restricted puberty blockers to children in clinical trials, stating there is not enough evidence to support their safety or clinical effectiveness as a routinely available treatment.
What went wrong at the Tavistock Clinic is to get stuck in one particular point of view. So what happened, people working there simply said it's more complex and we need to have services that understand that complexity and also respond in real time. We can't just in a cookie-cutter way do the same thing for every kid. It was not about that the approaches were intrinsically wrong. It was bad management of the complexity of the kids coming forward. And I think it's an important learning out of the Tavistock, how to do it wrong.
European countries like Norway, Sweden and Finland that once embraced puberty blockers have also wound them back.
I've just returned from Finland from an international conclave on the psychotherapy of children with gender dysphoria. And in 2020, they withdrew their support for gender-affirming treatment as the first line of treatment for this group of young people and have reverted to a psychotherapeutic approach.
The global scrutiny of medical intervention is placing increasing pressure on Australian gender clinics to show what they do is evidence-based. Dr. Stathis, thanks for agreeing to talk to us.
Thank you, it's an important issue.
Dr. Stephen Stathis oversees the gender service at the Queensland Children's Hospital, which last year had 922 active patients.
About 80% of the research on gender-affirming care has been published in the last 10 years. So the evidence base is emerging and it's changing. And so we're constantly reviewing that evidence base and adapting our model of care to take into consideration the new evidence. For instance, there's increasing evidence that puberty blockers impact on bone mineralisation, problems with the bones, so we're adapting our recommendations and our consent forms to take that into account.
Sapphire is receiving care at the Queensland Children's Hospital's Gender Service.
I'm 10. I'm in grade 5 and I see myself as a very energetic and joyful child. I want people to see me as a proud transgender girl. I'm a girl and that's who I am and that's who I will always be.
My youngest child from a very early age demonstrated what I now know as gender non-conformity. She was born as a male, assigned male at birth, and was always drawn to stereotypically feminine clothing, activities.
I knew that I wanted to be a girl and I was a girl, but I didn't really know what to say or how to say it, or if it was true. Oh, I knocked it over.
Back then, the family lived in Sydney. In grade 3, Sapphire was struggling because of bullying at school, and her mum noticed she was becoming increasingly sad and withdrawn. Alison sought help from the Westmead Children's Gender Service.
There, in fact, were no mental health services available at the clinic, which was very distressing and illustrated that the Westmead Clinic was not offering a complete model of care. So when I investigated the gender clinics in interstate, both in Melbourne and in Brisbane, the comparison between the services is night and day.
Alison decided to move her family to support her youngest child.
We were forced to relocate states. We were forced to leave New South Wales for Queensland in order to pursue affirming care.
I'll be on puberty blockers soon, and that's just going to be like pausing really my body from growing into what I don't want it to be. And I guess throughout my life, I've felt more and more like this isn't me. The body that I'm in, I don't want to be in this anymore.
One of the critiques of affirming care is that it is too affirming, if I can be blunt. It doesn't do enough exploration. What's your response to that in terms of your lived experience?
I think that transgender children are exploring themselves on a daily basis, and that level of introspection is present every single day of their lives. And that if they are provided with unequivocal love and support, then that inner dialogue that they have been having with themselves, they can then have with educated health professionals. It is an ever-present issue that we face every single day. It is the very core of my child's being, and it is unwavering. How was your afternoon?
Good. Good. Yeah.
Here's an apple, darling.
These families need our support.
Are you ready for netball tomorrow? Yeah.
What the gender-affirming model says is that we affirm where a young person is. It doesn't mean that we are locked in to treating a young person with puberty blockers or hormones. It doesn't mean that we are stuck in some ideology. What it does mean is that we're curious and we're keen to explore the reasons why they've presented.
There is a high-profile case of a psychiatrist at your hospital who is under review in relation to her views on transgender care for children. What's going on at this hospital?
Well, I can't comment on the specifics of that case. What I can say is that I welcome open debate across the psychiatry community and with the consultants in the hospital about a whole range of views.
The Queensland Children's Hospital has stood down a senior psychiatrist from clinical duties pending an investigation over a complaint from a young transgender patient. Dr Gillian Spencer is contesting the allegations and has lodged a complaint with the Queensland Human Rights Commission, saying as a doctor she should have a right to object to the affirmation model.
I can't comment on my own situation because of the code of conduct, but what I can tell you is that I think the vast majority of child and adolescent psychiatrists have serious concerns about the affirmation model.
We will fight, we will win, put the bigots in the bin. We will fight, we will win, put the bigots in the bin. We will fight, we will win, put the bigots in the bin.
Transitioning children is profound abuse.
When anti-trans activist Kelly J. Keane held a rally in Canberra earlier this year, Dr Gillian Spencer joined her on the podium to warn about gender-affirming care for young people.
Anyone's child, yours or mine, will be encouraged at school, online, during extracurricular activities, by their friends and by health professionals to contemplate their gender.
The hospital has told Dr Spencer she allegedly broke the Queensland Public Services Code of Conduct through her public statements. She contests this and says she was speaking in a private capacity.
There are massive health risks from these experimental medications and surgeries. We must speak out about the harms we see being done to women and children from gender ideology.
I think after the years of pressure and not being able to express these concerns, I just felt that I couldn't miss an opportunity to say them out loud. It's a really hard thing as a doctor to be in a position where you feel that you need to do an intervention that you don't agree with. Being able to speak aloud about it was, a relief.
Dr Spencer is calling for a federal inquiry into the gender affirmation model for young people.
I worry about the harm to children, and of concern is the knowledge that it is much more common for children who later will be gay or lesbian to show cross-sex identification and gender dysphoria in childhood. So there is that worry there that we're changing the trajectory of those children. My main concern with puberty blockers is that they stop the healing of the gender dysphoria through the course that naturally occurs through the course of adolescence that we know from the old studies.
Dr Spencer points to the prevalence of other issues like autism, ADHD and depression. Rather than medical intervention, she urges what's known as watchful waiting.
Watchful waiting is a medical term which tended to describe taking time to see if a problem resolves before intervening. But in terms of a watchful waiting approach for children with gender dysphoria, that would involve engaging with them, treating mental health comorbidities and engaging them in therapy and family therapy if need be, optimising their school functioning and engagement, and trying to get them connected to peers and activities that help them to feel good about who they are.
There's no evidence that exploratory therapy, simple psychological therapy, is a legitimate alternative to what is being offered through most of our specialist clinics in Australia. Exploratory psychological therapies, family therapies instead, watchful waiting are not evidence-based. They are the sets of intrinsic beliefs of different professional groups.
There's a new front in the battle over gender-affirming care, and it involves detransitioners.
Clap sync. My name is Courtney Coulson, a female-to-male to female detransitioner, and on this channel we try to figure out what the hell is wrong with me.
On this episode, why did I want to be a man?
It suggests to me that...
Courtney Coulson started testosterone treatment in her early 20s. She shares her story on her YouTube channel.
I think you can be pushed so far into a belief that these things start to become real and this other identity becomes real. I just went right through the trans sort of production lane there, and I stayed living as a man for 5 years.
COVID lockdown meant she couldn't go ahead with planned chest surgery, and eventually she stopped taking cross-sex hormones.
I stopped taking testosterone, and then my brain and body just sort of balanced itself out. Whatever I was going through when I wanted to transition, I seem to have outgrown it, gotten over it.
We don't have good data on the number of detransitioners. But what we do know is that there are an avalanche of young people coming out and talking about their experiences. And people as young as 18, 19, early 20s are warning their younger peers, don't make the mistake that I've made. I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life.
Research on those who regret transitioning is still emerging. Supporters of gender-affirming care put it at around 1%. But the voices of those who regret medical intervention are growing louder.
Before you commit to this thing for the rest of your life, don't you want to see every perspective? I should have been able to do that, and I didn't.
Melbourne's Royal Children's Hospital pioneered gender-affirming care in Australia. For the last few years, leaders of the service have kept their heads down as the anti-trans sentiment became more ferocious and politicised. They've decided they can't stay quiet any longer.
So there's lots of misinformation out there, and it affects young people that we see. We don't have anything to hide because we're really strong on what we do and the evidence behind it. Some of those who are critical of the gender-affirming approach almost assume that we blindly only look at gender, and we don't. People are complex, and we look at all aspects. We do take a biopsychosocial history and a developmental history, and we really consider what are the coexisting physical and mental health aspects, and what we try and look at addressing all of them, or what is the most prominent and urgent at that point in time.
So we all know that our wait list continues to be long, and it's a kind of difficult responsibility and burden that we all hold, and we're working really hard to develop supports for those on the wait list.
The multidisciplinary team includes psychiatrists, psychologists, paediatricians and nurses.
It's not one session and you get hormones. That's a total misconception about what we do. People can come to us and it can be months and years, depending on how old and what developmental stage they're at, before there is any medical treatment, if there is. We talk through at length with both a medical and a mental health clinician regarding reversible and irreversible effects. We talk about fertility, we talk about regret, we talk about changing your mind. We don't shy away from any of those hard questions.
Paediatrician Ken Pang is leading long-term research examining outcomes for young people attending the Melbourne clinic.
What we're aiming to do is to look at their long-term mental and physical health outcomes having received gender-affirming care at our hospital. We're also looking at things such as bone health. We're looking again at things like mental health, before and after puberty blockers, before and after gender-affirming hormones in the form of estrogen and testosterone.
There's a war on the actual research. How do you navigate that and provide the best standard of evidence?
I don't feel like there's a war of research when it comes to robust, evidence-based, rigorous research. I think that in terms of the war of opinion, as with many issues, lots of people have opinions, but what's problematic is that sometimes people who voice those opinions don't actually have any expertise in the area.
There's been a lot in the media and on social media at the moment that really doesn't align with our practice here at the Gender Service.
Dr Tram Nguyen fears the needs of young transgender people are being misunderstood. She's especially worried by the impact of the recent research from Westmead Children's Hospital.
Perhaps that's something that we can then bring to the rest of the community in terms of the education that we provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr Nguyen is one of 7 senior adolescent clinicians from around Australia who've published a critique rejecting the conclusions of the Westmead research.
We're not a group of clinicians or researchers who do this regularly, but for us, we just felt that there was a moral obligation.
These are senior clinicians who've done long-term research. What makes you so sure that their conclusions are wrong?
A number that has been quoted in other media outlets is 22% of young people in that study desisted. And 22% is a really alarming figure. It's alarming to young people, to parents and clinicians who don't work in the field. But when we look at the raw numbers, the 22% is actually incorrect.
You, alongside other doctors across the country, signed a letter sharing your concerns about the Westmead research. Why did you do that?
Because I believe that we need balanced research. And I believe that in that article there were flaws that need to be corrected.
Four Corners has tried many times to put these concerns to the Westmead researchers, but they've all declined to speak to us. In a statement, the Sydney Children's Hospitals Network said it's required to communicate research results, whether favourable or unfavourable, in ways that permit scrutiny and contribute to public knowledge and understanding. In 2021, the New South Wales Government allocated an annual budget of $1.5 million to open a new gender hub for under 25-year-olds. The service is to be run by Sydney Children's Hospitals Network and another health partner. But after 2 years and more funding, the service is yet to open. New South Wales Health has told Four Corners it's under development.
The last item on the agenda is a discussion about Westmead. I know that the clinicians at Westmead certainly were not partners in the research, and in fact...
These Sydney parents, some with kids at the Westmead Children's Gender Clinic, are worried about the future of their children's care.
The research has brought down an enormous amount of stress. Consequently, we've lost, really important people that have been a part of our kids' journey.
A paediatrician from the gender service left earlier this year, distressed over Noah's case and the impact of the controversial research.
For some staff to be considering leaving because they're not finding it to be a supportive environment to do what they know needs to be done for trans youth is really distressing for the families. For the trans youth that desperately need that support, what's going to happen to them?
Lannon's son Ashley eventually sought private medical care to have chest surgery and cross-sex hormones.
I'm 22, I'm a tradie, and I want people to know that trans people are here, we exist, and we have existed and will continue to exist. I'm not really into activism, I just go to work, I do my job, I go home. That's my life. I'll go out with mates on the weekend, but that's really it. I'm not an activist. I'm not good with my words. I'm not good with, persuading people about why they should change. No, it's better left to people who are better at it.
Some people contest whether it should happen at all. They say kids are too young. They say that it's gender activists pushing this stuff onto kids and making them question their gender. What's your response to that?
It makes me angry. I've lost my child because there was none of that support. To say that it's gender activists pushing it onto children, again, why would children choose this if it is so hard? Why would anyone choose something if it's so hard, but if it's not for them being authentic in themselves?
As an adult, I see myself to be happy, fully transitioned, healthy, and comfortable in my own body. I see myself as a woman, and hopefully by that time a lot more people will decide to come around and see me as a woman as well.
If this program has raised any issues of concern, you can contact one of these services.